Now, Washington says this week is critical for talks on ending the war in Ukraine. Over the weekend, U.S. President Donald Trump met Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky at St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican as the pair attended the funeral of Pope Francis. Now, in the aftermath of that meeting, Trump seemed to suggest that Ukraine could be willing to budge on Crimea.
Is Zelensky ready to give up Crimea, do you think, Mr. President?
Oh, I think so, yeah. Look, Crimea was 12 years ago. That was President Obama. They gave it up without a shot being fired. So don't talk to me about Crimea. Talk to Obama and Biden about Crimea. I see him as calmer. I think he understands the picture. And I think he wants to make a deal. I don't know if he wants to make a deal. I think he wants to make a deal.
Now, Russia has declared a 3-day ceasefire in Ukraine. The truce is meant to start on the 8th of May and would run to the 10th. It would also coincide with Russia commemorating Victory Day, the holiday celebrating the defeat over Nazi Germany. Now, Kyiv has responded, saying it wants an immediate ceasefire, which lasts for at least 30 days with immediate effect. The White House, meanwhile, is calling for a more permanent truce. For more on all of this, we can bring in our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Doug,
how are you, Delano?
Good to see you. Russia has put down some of its red lines when we're thinking of how to bring this war to an end.
Yeah, but I'd really like to address that ceasefire first, because we're back right at the same sort of situation we were in the Easter truce, the so-called ceasefire that Vladimir Putin declared back then, in which same terminology being used, humanitarian grounds, a gesture of goodwill. However, Russian troops stand ready to retaliate at the first sign of any Ukrainian violation of this so-called ceasefire. I'm using the word so-called ceasefire because you don't have to be that skeptical to say that Putin has rarely, if ever, seen a ceasefire that he didn't just outright break. This is a ceasefire, and I said this for the Easter truce, and I'll repeat it again. It's, in a sense, in name only. And I say that because Ukraine's immediate response was, well, if he's genuinely serious about a ceasefire, why doesn't it start immediately? Why do you have to wait for May 8th? Well, I mean, the reason's clear. May 8th is for propaganda purposes, for framing a narrative, a pro-Kremlin, pro-Putin, pro-Russian narrative around this war. And let's, not fool ourselves. This is what this is about. This is the weaponization of ceasefires in order to frame a narrative. May 8th is a great day because that is when Russia will be celebrating, a day later on May 9th, the Russia's defeat over Nazi Germany in World War II, an ultra-patriotic, ultra-nationalistic holiday that really, really is, it draws, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Russians out onto the streets of across the nation in parades, remembering what the Russians see as the West basically neglecting or completely failing to appreciate enough the Russian role in defeating Nazis. So this is a big date, perhaps the most patriotic date on the Russian calendar. So it's a symbolic declaration of another ceasefire, which, like I said, a ceasefire in name only. The Ukrainians have been holding out and basically saying, and they said this on Easter too, if Russia's serious about a ceasefire, why don't they just immediately do what we did last April when the U.S. and Ukraine both agreed and called for a full 30-day immediate halt in the fighting. 30 days. Make it longer and make it happen right now. But like I said, this is more about framing a narrative. This is more about the manipulation of a narrative and more specifically framing things and manipulating the opinion of one person who counts more than anything to Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin right now. That's Donald Trump. So framing Donald Trump's perspective at a time where the U.S. has been, in quotes, ramping up the pressure on Putin to moderate his own fighting and moderate the firing and the drones and all that to stop Vladimir, as Putin tweeted. It's not real pressure, but this is really what it's aimed at. It's putting himself forward. I'm the good guy. I'm the peacemaker, as opposed to those bad guys over there. Zelensky and those neo-Nazi Ukrainians, you see, those are the guys you should really be putting the pressure on. Look at me. I'm just here to make peace. I'm ready to negotiate any time.
So we have 3 different options on the table because we have Russia, who's called for a 3-day ceasefire starting next week. Ukraine says it wants a 30-day ceasefire. The White House wants a permanent ceasefire. But let's just say we have a ceasefire. Who is going to guarantee that those security guarantees? Who's going to make sure no one is in violation of a ceasefire?
Okay, so there are two answers to that question, the two parts to the answer. The first, who is going to guarantee it right now? We have no idea. The U.S. in its, their peace proposals to Ukraine, what it calls a peace proposal, which really is a proposal that entails the recognition of all of the territories that Russia has illegally seized through this war, including the territory that it illegally annexed back in 2014, Crimea, plus Ukraine vowing never to join NATO, plus Ukraine so-called demilitarizing, that is, not having an army essentially anymore. All of these things, and by the way, Russian condition denazifying. But like I said, it only had the vaguest of assurances about these security guarantees. The security guarantees, which are everything to the Ukrainians and Europeans. Without them, nothing that is signed has absolutely any value. Zero, nada, zilch, zip. And when I say the U.S. has only given vague assurances, because we don't know. At one point, the U.S. sort of implied that signing a minerals deal with Ukraine, which would presumably bring Americans over to work on the ground, investing in the mines over there, that in itself, just having Americans there, would be a security guarantee. Why would Russia attack if there are Americans on the ground? But look, the real security guarantees, what would it take? It would take some sort of backstop. It would take not just European peacekeepers, which is now the French-British initiative to sort of rally some sort of
coalition of the willing.
Coalition of the so-called willing. Once a ceasefire is in place, a big heavy if right now, big lift. But once you're actually in that negotiation stage to enforce an eventual ceasefire and to work towards a peace plan, even that won't be enough. The Europeans themselves have few illusions. At the end of the day, peacekeepers without what they call a U.S. backstop. Let me translate that. That means the United States in some form also offering security guarantees, covering the Europeans back as they try to cover the Ukrainians back. That's the only thing that's going to work. So when you ask me, what are those security guarantees from the U.S. at this moment in time? Nothing. There is nothing but very vague assurances. The Europeans, who do not for the moment have a real seat at the table, a genuine seat at the table, they know this. They have no illusions about it, but they keep talking about these peacekeepers. Maybe if you wish for it enough, something will take shape. And by virtue of the fact that someone's on board with the idea of European peacekeepers, not Russia certainly, but by virtue of that, perhaps they could then convince the U.S. it's in the U.S. interest to make this peace last, to bring the U.S. in.
Doug, what does Trump do now? Because the administration says this is going to be a critical week for the peace effort, but he's also threatened to walk away. What does walk away mean, and how? Where does that leave U.S. support for Kyiv?
Once again, and I'm supposed to be the guy who has some sort of answers, or at least the keys to some answers.
The oracle, yes.
We do not know. We do not know. I don't want to be disingenuous by saying this. We don't know, because I don't think actually Donald Trump himself has a very good handle on what comes next and what's going to happen. I think Donald Trump prides himself on the art of the deal, so-called the art of the deal. He wings it, essentially. He tries to play both sides, to put pressure on people. Bullying, intimidation are sort of the negotiating tactics he uses. They don't seem to be working right now. Actually, I won't say they don't seem to be. They aren't working so far with Vladimir Putin. So will he walk away? This is the thing. Is he using this as a negotiating tactic? Or is he really up against it, and he realizes he doesn't want to come out losing face here. He doesn't want to look like a loser. He doesn't want to look like the guy who promised to end the war in 24 hours but couldn't. He's looking to shift the blame. Walk away perhaps means walking away, saying, I tried. Zelensky wasn't playing by the book. Perhaps Putin wasn't playing by the book. My hunch is that he'll put more of the onus on Zelensky and the Ukrainians if this deal fails. But he's right now in that phase. He's looking for himself. He's looking for the best way to face himself if and when he cannot, fulfill his own promise from the campaign trail to end this war swiftly in as little as 24 hours, which obviously he didn't do. He doesn't quite know. The U.S. is exasperated. We know that. Yes, there's a measure of exasperation with Putin, but they also know. He said maybe we should deal with Putin differently. I also don't know at the end of the day he knows exactly what it takes to deal with Putin, quote, differently in a way that would really change the calculus of the peace plans and the peace negotiations going forward. It's really complicated for Donald Trump, and I don't think he himself has all the answers. Like I said, I think the modus operandi for a lot of this administration right now is they wing it while making it look like they have much more of a broad, concrete, conceptual plan behind it.
We'll see how this pans out in this critical week. I mean, we know his envoy, Steve Witkoff, had a 3-hour meeting with Vladimir Putin on Friday. Right. So we'll see. Thank you very much for that, Doug. Douglas Herbert there.